The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it an eerie whisper that seemed to crawl under my skin. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, casting the forest into a murky darkness that felt suffocating. We were supposed to be on a simple school camping trip, a weekend of laughter and marshmallow roasting. Little did we know that our innocent adventure would quickly spiral into a nightmare beyond our imagination. The moment we arrived at the campsite, a shiver ran down my spine. The place was surrounded by dense woods that seemed to close in on us, making it feel as if the trees themselves were watching, waiting. The flickering campfire provided only a small bubble of light, leaving the rest of the world shrouded in shadows. As the night wore on, our laughter and jokes faded into nervous murmurs. The forest seemed to come alive with strange noises, rustling leaves, distant footsteps, and unidentifiable whispers. We tried to shrug it off as our imagination playing tricks on us, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We huddled closer to the fire, trying to push away the unease that had settled in our chests. That's when we heard it, a child's laughter echoing through the trees. It was faint, distant, but there was something unnatural about it, something that sent a chill down my spine. We exchanged nervous glances, but no one spoke a word. "It's just a forest animal, right?" Mark finally said, though his voice trembled with doubt. "Yeah, probably just a raccoon or something," Sarah added, though her eyes darted around as if she expected something to jump out at any moment. But the laughter continued, growing louder and more unsettling. It was as if the sound was coming from all directions at once. Panic began to spread through our group, and we realized that our tents were no longer a safe haven. We decided to pack up and leave, but as we gathered our things, we realized that some of our belongings had vanished without a trace. "Where's my backpack?" Emily cried, her voice edged with hysteria. "I had it right here." "It was just here a minute ago," Mark insisted, his eyes wide with disbelief. As we frantically searched for our missing items, the laughter intensified, now mingled with a guttural growl that sent a shock of terror through me. The forest seemed to close in on us, the trees twisting and contorting as if they were alive, as if they were reaching out to grab us. "We need to get out of here now," I shouted, my heart racing as I grabbed onto whatever I could find and started running. The others followed suit, crashing through the underbrush, the chilling laughter and growls echoing in our ears. It felt like the forest itself was chasing us, like it was playing a sick game of cat and mouse. We stumbled and fell, cutting ourselves on thorns and branches, but the fear propelled us forward. Eventually, we burst into a clearing, gasping for breath. But our relief was short-lived. In the center of the clearing stood a dilapidated cabin, its windows shattered, its wooden walls rotting. It loomed over us like a ghostly sentinel, exuding an aura of malevolence that made my skin crawl. "We have to go inside," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "Are you insane?" Mark snapped, his eyes wide with terror. "We don't have a choice. It's the only shelter around," she replied, her gaze fixed on the cabin. Reluctantly, we entered the cabin, the creaking floorboards adding to the atmosphere of dread. The air inside was thick with dust and decay, and the walls were adorned with faded photographs that seemed to watch us with hollow eyes. As we huddled together, the laughter and growls faded, replaced by an oppressive silence. Hours passed, and the darkness outside seemed impenetrable. We dared not leave the cabin, even as our fear turned to exhaustion. And then, just as the first rays of dawn began to filter through the broken windows, we heard a soft, haunting melody, a music box. Its tinkling tune filled the air, carrying with it a melancholic nostalgia that tugged at our hearts. We followed the sound, drawn deeper into the cabin, and there in the corner of a room we found it, a dusty music box, its lid slowly opening and closing on its own. Before we could react, a whisper rose from the shadows, chilling our blood. "You're mine now." The cabin trembled, its walls groaning as if they were alive. The room twisted and distorted, the floor falling away beneath us. We screamed, but our voices were swallowed by the abyss. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. I found myself lying on the grassy forest floor, the sun breaking through the clouds. The cabin was nowhere to be seen. The clearing stretched out before me, peaceful and serene. I stumbled to my feet, my heart pounding, my mind grappling with the horrors I had just witnessed. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination brought on by fear? Or had we truly experienced something beyond comprehension? To this day, I can't shake the feeling that the forest is still watching, waiting for its next unsuspecting victims. And every time I hear a child's laughter in the distance, a chill runs down my spine, and I'm transported back to that nightmarish camping trip gone wrong. The school camping trip had started out like any other, with a sense of excitement in the air and a bus full of rowdy teenagers. We arrived at the remote campsite, surrounded by towering trees and the promise of adventure. The counselors set up the tents, and we all gathered around the campfire for ghost stories that night. Little did we know, those stories would pale in comparison to the horrors that awaited us. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the temperature dropped, and a chill settled in the air. We huddled closer to the campfire, our faces illuminated by its flickering light. The flames cast eerie shadows on the trees, and the distant hoot of an owl sent shivers down our spines. "That was a pretty creepy story, right?" Emily said, nudging me with an impish grin. She was always the one to lighten the mood. "Yeah, but it's all just stories," Mark chimed in, trying to sound brave. Little did we know those words would come back to haunt us. As the night wore on, we retreated to our tents, the forest settling into an unsettling silence. The wind rustled the leaves, and the moon cast an eerie glow through the tent fabric. I lay in my sleeping bag, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in my chest. And then I heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from just outside the tent. My heart raced as my mind raced through explanations. A small animal, maybe a squirrel. But the scratching grew louder, more insistent, and panic clawed its way up my throat. I unzipped the tent just a little, peering out into the darkness. The beam of my flashlight revealed nothing but trees and shadows. Just as I was about to dismiss it as my imagination, a figure darted past, so quick I barely had time to register it. "Guys, did anyone else see that?" I whispered, my voice quivering. "See what?" Emily's voice was muffled from inside her tent. "There was something out there, I swear," I replied, my heart still racing. Mark unzipped his tent and joined me, shining his flashlight around. "I don't see anything. Maybe it was just an animal." But deep down, we all knew it wasn't an animal. There was something unnatural about the way it moved, something that sent a chill down our spines. Reluctantly, we crawled back into our tents, the scratching sound now gone. We tried to convince ourselves that it was just our imagination, that the darkness was playing tricks on us, but the feeling of being watched lingered, and sleep eluded us all. As the night dragged on, a low fog began to roll in, shrouding the campsite in an eerie mist. The moon was now completely hidden, and the air grew colder, thick with an otherworldly heaviness. It was then that we heard it, a soft, mournful wail that seemed to come from all directions at once. "What is that?" Emily's voice trembled. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here," I said, my fear giving way to determination. We quickly gathered our things and rushed out of our tents, the fog making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. The campsite that had seemed so familiar earlier now felt like a labyrinth of shadows. "Stay close together," Mark urged, his voice barely audible over the wailing wind. We stumbled through the fog, our hearts pounding in our chests, the wails growing louder and more piercing with every step. The trees seemed to close in on us, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the wails ceased. The fog lifted, and we found ourselves standing at the edge of a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood an old, decrepit cabin, its windows shattered, its walls sagging with decay. "What is that place?" Emily's voice shook. "I don't know, but we have nowhere else to go," Mark replied, his gaze fixed on the cabin. As if drawn by an invisible force, we approached the cabin. The air around it was heavy with a sense of foreboding, and each step felt like a descent into a nightmare. The cabin's door creaked open as if inviting us in. We hesitated, the dread in the pit of our stomachs growing stronger. But something inside us compelled us to enter, to uncover the secrets this place held. The interior was just as dilapidated as the exterior. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor, and a musty smell hung in the air. The walls were covered in faded, peeling wallpaper that depicted scenes of long-forgotten joy and laughter. "This place gives me the creeps," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "We need to find a way out," Mark said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. We explored the cabin, searching for another exit, but the windows were all boarded up, and the front door seemed to have sealed itself shut. Panic began to rise within us as the realization set in. We were trapped. As we turned to leave, the cabin seemed to come alive around us. The walls groaned, the floorboards creaked, and the wallpaper began to shift, the scenes it depicted morphing into twisted, macabre images. A cold wind swept through the cabin, carrying with it a haunting whisper. "You shouldn't have come here." We froze, our breaths caught in our throats. The voice seemed to come from all directions, echoing through the cabin. And then, a figure emerged from the shadows, a pale, gaunt figure with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through our very souls. "You trespassed into my domain," the figure hissed, its voice a chilling melody. "We didn't mean to," I stammered, my heart pounding. "Ignorance is not an excuse," the figure replied, its presence suffocating. The cabin trembled, the walls closing in on us. The floor seemed to give way, and we found ourselves falling into darkness. Our screams were drowned out by the cacophony of the cabin's groans and the figure's haunting laughter. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. We found ourselves lying in a clearing, the first light of dawn breaking through the trees. The cabin was nowhere to be seen, and the wails, the fog, and the figure had all vanished. We stumbled to our feet, our bodies battered and minds reeling. We had escaped whatever malevolent force had inhabited that place, but the memories of that night would haunt us forever. As we made our way back to the campsite, the morning sun painting the forest with warmth and light, I couldn't shake the feeling that the woods held secrets far darker than we could comprehend. The school camping trip had indeed gone wrong, leaving us forever scarred by the terrors that lurked within the shadows. The school camping trip had been highly anticipated by all of us. It was a chance to escape the monotony of classrooms and textbooks, a chance to explore the great outdoors and create memories that would last a lifetime. Little did we know that those memories would be tinged with a sense of dread and fear. We arrived at the campsite, our excitement palpable as we set up our tents and gathered around the campfire. The counselors regaled us with stories of the area's history, tales of long-forgotten spirits and unexplained phenomena. We laughed, feeling invincible in our youth, convinced that nothing could dampen our spirits. As the night fell, the campfire crackled and the stars lit up the sky. We shared ghost stories, each tale more terrifying than the last, trying to outdo one another with gruesome details and eerie twists. But there was one story that stood out, told by an old man who lived nearby. He spoke of a ghostly figure that roamed the woods, a figure with hollow eyes and a tattered school uniform. The figure was said to target those who dared to camp near the old abandoned schoolhouse deep within the forest. We chuckled at the tale, dismissing it as the ramblings of a superstitious local. As the night progressed, the campfire's warmth and the company of friends eased our fears. But as we retired to our tents, an inexplicable unease settled over me. The woods, which had seemed enchanting during the day, now felt suffocating, as if they were closing in on us. I lay in my sleeping bag, my mind restless, and I tried to shake off the feeling. And then in the distance, I heard it, the soft, distant sound of children's laughter. I dismissed it as a trick of the wind, but it persisted, growing louder and more distinct. It was as if the laughter was approaching, coming closer to our campsite. I unzipped my tent and peered out, scanning the darkness for the source of the sound. The laughter echoed through the trees, sending shivers down my spine. And then, I saw it, a flicker of movement among the shadows. I squinted, my heart racing, trying to make out what it was. And then I saw her, a young girl, no older than 10, dressed in a tattered school uniform. Her eyes were hollow, devoid of life, and her laughter was hauntingly sweet. She stood at the edge of the clearing, staring at me with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. "Hey, who's out there?" I called, my voice trembling. The girl's laughter stopped abruptly, and she turned and disappeared into the darkness. I was left standing there, my heart pounding, my mind reeling. Had I really seen a ghostly figure, or was it just my imagination playing tricks on me? I crawled back into my tent, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. But sleep eluded me, and every rustle of leaves, every distant sound seemed to amplify my fear. The night felt endless, as if time had slowed to a crawl. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, I emerged from my tent, my exhaustion evident in the circles under my eyes. The others were already awake, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Mark joked, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. I hesitated, unsure of how to explain what I had witnessed. Emily, always intuitive, sensed my unease and placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. "I saw something last night," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "A girl in a school uniform. She was staring at me." The color drained from their faces as they exchanged glances. "You saw her too?" Sarah said, her voice shaky. "You mean you've seen her before?" I asked, my fear giving way to curiosity. They nodded, their expressions a mix of fear and uncertainty. They described similar encounters, glimpses of a girl in a tattered school uniform, hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness, and an eerie silence that followed her presence. We decided to investigate further, to venture into the woods and find the abandoned schoolhouse the old man had mentioned. Armed with flashlights and a mixture of excitement and trepidation, we navigated the dense underbrush, guided by the stories and the sense of unease that seemed to hang in the air. And then, we stumbled upon it. A decrepit building, its walls covered in ivy, its windows shattered, and its door hanging off its hinges. The schoolhouse stood as a haunting reminder of the past, a place that had once been filled with laughter and learning but now lay abandoned and forgotten. As we entered the schoolhouse, the air grew cold, and a sense of foreboding settled over us. The walls were adorned with faded murals, and the remnants of desks and chairs lay scattered across the floor. It was a stark contrast to the vibrant and carefree atmosphere we had experienced earlier. And then, as if in response to our presence, we heard it, the soft sound of children's laughter echoing through the halls. We exchanged nervous glances, our flashlights shaking in our hands. The laughter seemed to come from all directions at once, as if the very walls were mocking us. "We need to leave," Mark said, his voice strained. But before we could turn and flee, the laughter transformed into a chorus of whispers, indistinct, chilling, and seemingly impossible to locate. The air grew colder, and a deep sense of dread settled in our chests. "Who are you?" Emily called out, her voice quivering. And then, from the shadows, she emerged, the girl in the tattered school uniform. Her eyes were hollow, her expression a mix of sorrow and longing. She stared at us, her presence radiating an otherworldly energy. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered, her voice carrying a weight of centuries. "We didn't mean any harm," Sarah said, her voice shaking. The girl's gaze seemed to pierce through us, as if she was peering into our very souls. "You carry the weight of your fears and regrets. You brought them into this place, and now you must face the consequences." A gust of wind swept through the schoolhouse, extinguishing our flashlights and plunging us into darkness. Panic surged within us as we fumbled to relight the flashlights, the whispers growing louder and more chaotic. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the whispers ceased, and the girl was gone. The schoolhouse was silent once more, and we were left standing there, our hearts pounding, our minds grappling with the inexplicable. We stumbled out of the schoolhouse, our breaths heavy and our steps shaky. The sun was rising, casting a warm glow over the clearing, but the weight of our experience lingered. "We should have listened to the old man's warning," Mark said, his voice somber. As we made our way back to the campsite, the sense of dread slowly lifted, replaced by a deep respect for the stories and legends that had been woven into the fabric of the area. The school camping trip had indeed gone wrong, but it had also taught us that there are mysteries beyond our understanding, forces that cannot be explained by logic alone. And as we sat around the campfire that morning, watching the sun rise and feeling the warmth on our faces, we knew that the memories we had created, of fear, camaraderie, and the unknown, would stay with us forever. A reminder that sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that leave us questioning the boundaries of reality.